Well, Trevor, I've got 11. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. So I think one of the questions that we had earlier definitely alluded to some of the other solutions that we have coming, right? So I don't want to steal your thunder, but I definitely want to progress the story along. So for those of you who have been with us since the beginning, we think about Chase, right? So Chase has all this different types of access. He's got a certain working style. And our job as security professionals is to make sure that we protect Chase, and then we protect the data that Chase needs access to. So what we'll do now is, if we remember back in Doug's video, after he gained initial access, he's tried to escalate, upwards and move laterally with, I want to say it was enterprise admin credentials, or at least domain admin credentials. So I think that fits very nicely into your story, Trevor. So with that, I'll go ahead and let you do an introduction and get started.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it. Thanks, Sonny. Yes, good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Trevor Combs. I am a solutions engineer here at BeyondTrust, and we're going to talk about endpoint privilege management here. And kind of back to Sean Sparks' question earlier about how do you keep that Word document from opening? How do you keep that macro from running? And that's really where endpoint privilege management comes into play in a number of use cases. So when we're talking about the endpoint, there's usually 5 key areas that we're all pretty familiar with when we're talking about trying to protect the endpoint. Antivirus being number one. I've never worked for an organization in the last at least 15 years that hasn't had some sort of antivirus on the endpoint. We're also typically doing some type of detection and response, whether it be at the firewall level or through the antivirus, the collection data. And then there's usually always some sort of endpoint tool, like your SIM tools, your DLP, something that's monitoring network layer or monitoring application layer of things that are happening within the environment to help protect our systems and let us know something's going on. The two, though, that are probably the most commonly overlooked, though, are when we start to really look at the endpoint and we start to remove admin rights, or if we haven't removed admin rights, that's typically the number one thing. But once we do, how are we also programmatically blocking those malicious applications? So earlier, Chase, right, opened that Word document, enabled a bunch of macros, let things run. Even if Chase didn't have administrative privileges, there's still things that can run at the user context level, and we can still get into trouble because, as you saw in that hack example, right, we had network shares that Chase had access to at the user context level, not necessarily the admin privilege level. So there's still a lot of damage that can occur. And, most of the time our antivirus is going to help protect us from that. I'm not discounting antivirus at all, but as you all know, antivirus is a reactive process or application. It only can protect us against what it knows. And whereas with endpoint protection, we need something that can also be monitoring behaviors of applications, right? So we talked about identity behavior with Okta, but what about at the endpoint level, the application level, that user, the trust level that they have at that least privilege? In addition, the whole removing admin rights is just such a big thing. There's still a lot of organizations that haven't gone that route. They haven't completely gone that route. And that really is what the experts are starting to tell us is, especially based on the Microsoft vulnerability reports from 2020, but the experts are saying that we really need to remove admin rights. And it's not just from, Chase, if he works maybe in payroll or maybe he works in marketing or sales. He might be a developer. He might be an intern. He might be a system engineer. And those are typically people that retain those rights through some type of process, but those are still critical people, and they're still human beings, right? At the end of the day, we're all still humans. We all still get tired. We all make mistakes. We click on things that we shouldn't sometimes, or we're doing things that we think is in the best interest of our job or our company, and things happen. But removing admin rights is really one of the most basic, but it's the most powerful thing that you can do to protect an organization. But it comes with all this baggage in terms of productivity and some other things that we're going to talk about today. And one thing that really has been really eye-opening the last few years is the ability to protect not only our end users on Windows and Mac OS, but really the Unix and Linux platform. A lot of people forget about all of these file servers and these other critical systems or these hardware devices that are running a Linux or a Unix platform. And maybe we're vaulting the credential, maybe we're storing it, okay, only certain people have access to it, but those accounts are still there. And they still have privilege that can get us into a lot of trouble and can really create a lot of havoc for an organization. And as a note, we saw that hack example, ransomware and phishing attempts. Again, they don't just happen with privileged accounts. They can happen at the user context level, that least privileged model. And so we just need a way of having that extra guardrail there to ensure that we're protecting the organization. So when we talk about some of the vulnerabilities and things that we typically look at, and some of the things that we've tied into the product, which I'll talk about here in a moment, I really like to refer folks to the Microsoft Vulnerabilities Report. This is an awesome report. It's a pretty easy read. It's when printed out, it's maybe 20 pages, but it really gives us a lot of insight into not only the Microsoft vulnerability recommendations, but really how we can negate those risks and nip those in the bud. And just to summarize here on my next slide, I love this slide because these numbers are real, and sometimes they seem insane, but if you can remove admin rights in an organization and you can really operate in a least privilege model, you can prevent 80% of breaches, because 80% of breaches typically involve a privileged account, some type of elevated account, whether it's a service account, whether it's a user having more privilege on their machine than they should. 77% of critical Microsoft vulnerabilities that were identified can also be mitigated by, again, removing those admin rights. 100% of IE, Internet Explorer vulnerabilities in 2020, completely mitigated if there were no admin rights. And again, the 85% number, I just like to dictate these and show these because they're so high. I mean, as we saw in the quote on the previous slide, something as small as removing admin rights can have such a positive impact in terms of preventing risk and malicious behavior in an environment. But again, it does come with some perceived baggage. So the BeyondTrust approach at BeyondTrust, how we look at going to that least privilege model and illuminating that threat vector is really 4 key areas. So we want to have zero admin. And when I say zero admins, this is always kind of okay, you're insane, Trevor, when I'm talking to customers. I mean zero admins. There should be no one in the environment that has a privileged account that they're using to access a system or work on a system. This includes developers. This includes engineering teams. This includes just about anybody that thinks they need a privileged account to do their job. Programmatic application control. So this goes back to Sean Sparks' question earlier about how do we prevent these things from happening within applications? And that's where we're able to add an extra layer within endpoint privilege management to help complement things like AV, DLP, and all of our other monitoring to prevent things before they happen, right? We want to see that kind of malicious or suspicious behavior, and we want to stop it right in its tracks. We want to have auditing around, but we want to make sure that it doesn't occur. Enhancing security. And so that is that extra kind of layer of that trusted application protection. So it's not only about the application control, but then what are applications doing together in an environment, right? So I'm keep going back because it was just great. I feel like Sean, should be part of my presentation for asking that question when he did. But the fact that we know we're going to get applications or documents that might have macros. We might need to do things, inter-application-wise, PowerShell scripting, development. But there are times when things are doing things that they shouldn't do, right? Word should not be launching a script to go maybe extract a file and then throw a bunch of executables or other files in a folder and then allow access, right? There's certain things that maybe it should do in the way it was designed to do versus the malicious way. And then the other big key is having actionable intelligence. So I can, give you a solution. I can put something on the machine. We can say, hey, we're going to block this. But it's not always about just the user experience. It's about the experience of the people that have to own the product and take the bullets when things aren't working. So giving our users and our customers data that's actionable. You can actually take it and understand what you're looking at. You can actually take action immediately. You're not spending a week going through a bunch of data files trying to figure out what's going on in the environment or what's happening or what you should do. So having that actionable intelligence is really key, especially when we talk about our products and we talk about endpoint privilege management. One other key thing too is when we think about least privilege, we think about taking away privileged accounts and we want to lock things down. A lot of times we're just thinking about the laptops, right? The desktops that users are using every day. A lot of times we're not thinking about those Windows servers, those Unix and Linux servers. We're not thinking about those devices that are running core operating systems, right? Appliances, etc. We're typically just focused on that end user and what they're doing right there. We have a mantra that we feel like every endpoint should be protected and that we should be enforcing least privilege across the entire enterprise, whether it's workstation, laptop, server, etc. And the cool thing is we have a way of doing that doesn't, just blow your mind in a negative way. So again, when we talk about it, we're thinking about all endpoints across the enterprise. So this is always fun. You've all probably been there. My last gig where I was at, we went through the entire process of trying to remove admin rights. And I say trying because we did. We took admin rights away, and then we had our exception process in play, right? And then everybody could go in and fill out the form and get approved by the VP, and they would get 90 days or 30 days, whatever it might be, of their admin rights back, so that way they could do their job, right? And say that they weren't dead in the water. So it's always this impossible compromise when I've seen more of the process managed approaches. We've either got on the left, the underlocked people, right? We gave them their admin rights back. They've got it for whatever amount of time, but now they're a prime target because anything they do in that context on their machine has full-blown rights and can really get us in trouble, especially if that user, as our scenario when we started today, maybe they get phished or maybe they go down the wrong rabbit hole. Now that account is very susceptible. And then we got the ones on the right. Okay, we took away their rights. Now they're overlocked. They're screaming. They're freaking out. I can't do this one thing. I'm completely unproductive now, and I'm extremely frustrated. And so it's really about trying to create that balance and bring them in the middle, right? We want them to be productive. We don't want them to be frustrated, and we don't want them to be a target. And if they become a target, we want to be able to keep that door closed and keep those malicious folks out, and have that equal balance in between without having to, add 20 FTEs to manage some process. And also we're taking the human element out of it when we're able to balance with endpoint management. We don't have to rely so much on human behavior or lack of the appropriate human behavior. So this is always fun. Anytime I get approached by a prospect or a customer, or even someone that's already doing something similar to this, it's always fun to have the conversation about, okay, why have we not completely removed admin rights? Why have we not removed access to root accounts? Why do we have stuff still in the shadow files on the Unix and Linux machines that have full-blown access? Why are we doing that? And it's a lot of it's perception or just a bad experience from trying to do it before. The first one, though, is always the number one, though. It's really about that negative impact. We're going to destroy productivity. Our users are going to be dead in the water. We're going to stop making money. Everybody's going to scream and complain, and the VP that signed off on it's going to lose his job. And so he's like, nope, we're not doing it. We're going to do it really light, and we're going to hope everything goes well. So, that negative impact and that perceived negative impact there's some realness there, because why do our users need admin rights? Well, there are reasons based on how the operating systems work, right? The first one would be software installation. Whether we've got a centralized software deployment product or not, there are going to be times where an application needs to be installed. Maybe it's even being installed automatically, but there might be some user action. Maybe the user has to log in and the application has to kick off an install, and it needs that admin token in order to do that. System settings. This was big in my prior life when I was a field technician. I would be going out, plugging into things, and I had to modify my network settings on my laptop. So I had to change the IP settings or go into the device manager. Sometimes I had to remove and re-add devices with different drivers. Those are all things within the Windows environment that require an admin token to do it. You have to use that annoying UAC prompt if you don't have privilege, and you have to authenticate in order to run some of those functions within the system settings. Very common as well in the Mac OS space. We haven't talked about Mac yet. Some companies may have 1, they may have 0, they may have 10, but there's still Macs out there. Those are still endpoints that present a risk, because most of the time the users are admins. And Apple has done everything they can to really try and protect us from bad things. But when we're in system utilities or system settings, especially in a Mac, it's enter your password. You want to change this? Enter your password. You want to change this? Enter your password. And it typically means you have to have an admin level password to do that. And so we're creating, a negative experience there too if we're not giving the user admin rights. Software updates. We've all gone through this before. We got the application installed. It needs an update. Visual Studio, I got developers. They got to be admins on their machines, because anytime they need to install a new language framework, a new programming framework, they need to have admin rights, because the program needs admin rights in order to reach out and update the core system files within the application. Another reason that admin prompt comes up, and they need to have those rights. And then legacy or poorly coded software. And I'm not trying to take a dab at poorly coded software. What I'm really going there is we've got legacy applications. I've got some banking customers that literally have this app. It's super cool for them. It does this neat thing they need to do. They know no other way to do it, but the developer, it's a very small app, and it requires admin rights to run, or it won't work. There's things out there. When we're doing dev testing, sometimes developers need that level of access when they're coding apps as well. So a lot of different use cases, but these are real use cases, and they happen. And typically what's going to happen is we're going to create a negative impact if the users can't fulfill these needs when they need them. The other one, which I love, I literally took this out of context directly from a friend of mine that was in operations, said it's just so much quicker and easier to give everybody admin rights and even root accounts, just to everybody. You know, it works. I trust these people. They're cool. They're smart. It's just easier. And you know what? It is. It's super quick. It's super easy. But again, we're opening the door, right? We're allowing that least privilege to just be a thing of the past. And again, we're talking about human beings, right? We have flaws. We get tired. But it is easier, and it's so much quicker. Auditing can be a nightmare, though, too. Who did I give rights to? Who has this? Who has that? And so, again, if we do run into a breach or we run into an audit-level event, it becomes very cumbersome to try and understand what's going on in the environment and maybe where that loophole or that risk was when we're trying to find it. And then my favorite, just because I'm biased, I spent over 14 years in the support world. I used to manage a lot of outsourced service desks across the globe. And the excessive workload to a service desk is real. When we do something like go out and say, we're going to take admin rights away from everybody, guess who feels it the most? The end users do, but the service desk feels it the most because they're the ones now fielding those calls, right, for those software updates, for those system setting changes, things that they need to do, the requests to get admin rights. All of this typically is going to roll back through whoever's responsible for support. And usually, bless our hearts, we're in the service desk world, we're usually the last ones to find out. Or we're like, oh, it's just a few calls to the service desk, no problem. And it just becomes a nightmare. I don't know about you guys, any of you guys work in support or have felt that realm. Anytime a new app rolled out or a new process rolled out, I never was authorized, 10 extra FTE to go manage the project for 6 months. In a dream world, it'd be great, but typically that wasn't the case. Instead, it was figure it out, right? Work through it. And we want to have a good experience for the end users we're supporting, but typically the service desk is going to get hit hard and they're going to get heavy. And it's going to continue because these things aren't just a one and done thing typically. There's always going to be some new use case, some new application that a user might get hit with. So those are the top three. And again, it's usually why a lot of organizations don't go full-fledged least privilege, or they don't do it at all, or when they do it, they feel like, well, we've got a process in place, but then that process becomes antiquated or outdated 3 days in because now there's just so much churn and so much change within what's going on. So why BeyondTrust? So from an endpoint perspective, we have this down. We have probably what I would consider the best solution in the marketplace. When it comes to Windows, we have best in class. We do Mac like no one else does it, and even be able to do Unix and Linux all within endpoint management, I think is really key. So we're not forgetting somebody. We're not saying, oh, we won't worry about them as much, right? We're able to encompass the entire endpoint strategy and suite within our endpoint management solution. We are ranked as the market leader. You can go out and do your research. We are super proud of the ranking that we've received by APM. We do have one of the best, broadest portfolios. So when it's endpoint management, we also have another huge suite of solutions where we're talking about the entire PAM strategy. So, and the great thing is they all have an integrated platform. So we can talk together, we can work together, and we can help customers really start where they want. So maybe endpoint management's important to you, great, we can start there. Maybe there's some other pieces of PAM that you want to start with, great, we can start there. We don't require you or force you to have to start in a certain order. We can really help meet those needs where you need them today and then move on down that pathway and that journey. We do have a global presence, very proud of that. We are worldwide. And we do have what I call the best customer-driven when we talk about features, when we talk about how our products work. We do have a 90% renewal rate, but what I think is great is even when I was a customer, I drank the Kool-Aid, joined the club about 4 years ago, is features and requests that I had were actually going into the product. Every time I talk with our product management teams, they always like to reiterate to me that, hey, over 95% of the work that we're doing right now is all customer driven. It's all come from feedback from customers about how they know the product's going to work better for them. And we are pioneers in the technology. We have a huge heritage and a huge history of innovation, again, going back to that customer driven concept. And we have over 75 patents in the marketplace. And again, we are totally committed to R&D and totally committed to future releases that are really driven by the customer. So how do we do it from an endpoint perspective? So what I love about EPM is that we can give our customers an immediate return on investment. Octa was talking earlier about how they're able to do things very quickly within minutes, get your users, your identities set up. We can do the same thing from an endpoint strategy. We can get our users involved. Most of the time, in my experience in the past, when we've looked at endpoint solutions, it's typically kind of a install it, let it soak, maybe let it collect. Everybody's just kind of set up to do whatever they were doing before. We're just collecting data. And that data collection might take 4 months, it might take 8 months. And then we get to go back in and re-engage, and we get to figure out, okay, what does this data mean? And how can we start turning things on? So by that time, sometimes a year has gone by before we're actually using the solution, before we're actually using it to protect the endpoints. The reason that we invested in that software and that solution was to get things protected, and we're having to wait 4, 6, 8, 12 months in order to do it. We have what's called Quick Start. And Quick Start is actually a template, if you will. It's built off about 14 years of customer feedback, Microsoft vulnerability assessment data, and just real-world examples and real-world use cases that we see across the industry. And we found that we can typically solve for 85 to 95% of a customer's use cases with our Quick Start policy. And what this does is this allows us to basically group our users in what we call flexibility work styles. We have a high, a medium, and low. So a lot of times we'll put everybody in the high flex, we'll kind of see how things are going, and then we can slowly tick people in or groups into maybe a medium or a low. To get your high flex is maybe like your developers, your sysadmins, people that need a lot of flexibility on their machine typically. They might be installing or updating applications that we trust, etc. Whereas medium and low, those are people that probably have the majority of what they need already there. They don't need to update things, they don't need to install anything. So we're gonna treat them a little bit differently. But then giving us a user experience, this is my favorite part of the product as well, is giving us the ability to build in an experience that's different based on different users, different applications. It's not just a yes or a no, or a, you're cool or you're not cool. Giving us different workflows that are going to help drive that customer experience for your customers. Maybe maybe I'm a field tech. Maybe I need to launch command prompt as an admin. So maybe I do that. Maybe it pops up and says, hey, you're about to do this, just FYI, we don't really think you should all the time. Are you sure you want to do it? Yes, no prompt. Maybe we just let it happen. Maybe we ask the user for a reason why they're doing it and then still allow them to do it. Maybe a more low flex user, maybe they're trying to install the latest version of Chrome. Maybe we don't want them to use Chrome. So maybe there is a use case for that 1 or 2 people, right? There's always those weird exceptions. And that's what I feel like we're fighting sometimes, is there's 2 or 3 people that need to do something very specific, and then it becomes a nightmare to try and manage that. So in this case, maybe we just throw them up a prompt, say, hey, I need you to contact the service desk, give them this code, they'll review this, and we'll let this application do what it needs to do. Or maybe we want to just automate that process. We can automatically submit a ticket to the ITSM that goes through the workflow process. Once it's approved or denied, then the user's notified. They can then simply interact with the application. They can put in their code, and then they can go about their day. Maybe we've got a desk side support person that's walked by. They're authorized to approve certain things. They can just key in their credentials, and automatically it will log it. It'll allow it to happen. But I think the big thing here is that everything that we're doing is going back into that actionable data, so we can understand what's happening in the environment, where things are happening, what users are using what. So when we have people that are, screaming, crying wolf, saying, hey, I can't do anything anymore, this thing just bogging me down, we can actually go and see what their experiences look like and understand if there is a problem, or if maybe they're just Trevor who just never knows how to stop complaining every time something new happens, right? We've moved the cheese. So here it's really great because we can give that unique user experience, not just based on the yes or no, but we can really dig in deep and give our users a different experience based on what criticality levels we see within the environment. This is also where it comes into play. I'm just going to reference back to Sean's question again about, how do you keep Word from opening? Well, we wouldn't restrict Word from opening, because that would be a trusted application. It's probably signed by Microsoft. But when that user goes and clicks that enable macro button, and we see that it's trying to call a PowerShell script, or it's trying to download from a source that we don't trust, that's where we're going to stop it. That's where we're going to either just not allow it to happen. Maybe we're going to let the user know that, hey, something's occurring here. We're not going to let it happen. And then we're also logging that. So we have that data. We're putting that into our action reporting, and that way our administrators then know that something fishy is going on in the environment. We know where it happened, where it came from, and how many users might be impacted. All right. One other thing I like to call it here is we've talked a lot about the user experience, but what I like is, since I've always been on the other end of it, is having a really good management experience. So having things like the Quick Start, having very unique market features that are typically very again, customer driven, but they're also market specific, because again, it's that feedback from our customers, having that comprehensive analytics and that really, really good end user experience. But I think the big call out here is that all of these are captured back to the administrators, the owners of the solutions, so they can actually have a good experience with it as well. They can understand how to use it. They can get the data they need quickly. I mentioned earlier, we do have probably the most mature Mac solution available anywhere in the globe, so we can accomplish both endpoint types within a single solution. And we also know that some customers aren't ready to go SaaS. Although we have a great SaaS model, we also still have the on-premise solution as well. Because different customers, different markets, different entities, they need different options, and so we can accomplish both of those out of the box. And then last but never least, we're always looking at compliance. So if you do fall into one of these, this is a great way to ensure that we have the compliances that we can meet. We're also talking about operational efficiencies, right? We talked about earlier, we don't want to hinder our users. We want to make sure that they're still having a good experience. Just a little feedback here we've gotten from HDI. HDI is an awesome organization from the support side. They've given us some feedback that they've done some calculations. We can typically save around $65 per ticket. And that's basically over a reduction of support costs, not having to drive all these users to the support desk. And then Gartner's giving us some feedback around estimates of around $2,400 average savings for our end users. And that also goes into that service request cost bucket, right? Downtime of having to, not be able to do things and be able to have a more efficient way of doing it using endpoint privilege management. And then we've talked about the security risks, right? Again, over 80% of Microsoft vulnerabilities can be prevented by going to a least privilege model and getting rid of those privileged accounts within your environment. And then, we talked about the other ones here too, the 100% of IE and 80% of security breaches could all be mitigated by going to a least privilege model. All right. With that said, I have a couple of customer perspectives here, but I've kind of talked through this, some feedback we got from customers. Again, whether the organization is 200 users or 350,000 users, the solution's designed to scale. It's designed to be an enterprise solution out of the box for a customer of any size. And again, really deliver on that return on investment and not have to wait weeks, months, years to start seeing the impact. All right, with that said, I think, Johnny, we can go ahead and hop over, see if we have any questions.
Yeah, I'm going to kick out a poll, give you just a second there to catch your breath, maybe take a sip.
Sure.
Quite a bit of content that you put out. So I'll kick this poll out for the audience while we queue up the questions that have come in. Make sure we have enough time for these. So I think you covered this, but one of the first questions that came in was whether the products today speak about application-wide or blacklisting. Definitely in the wheelhouse of the BeyondTrust stack. I think you talked about that a good bit. There's a two-part question here for you, though, Trevor. So one that came in, same person, right? Interested in how zero admins work for Linux and how the privileged accounts are centrally managed. And the follow-on to that question was also, how about admin rights for your network scanners like Nessus, et cetera, who need authenticated access? How do you handle this type of access?
Yeah, so for the Linux realm from privileged accounts, what we do is we are using our agent. It's designed, we have one for Windows, we have one for Mac, we also have one for Linux and Unix. And so what we're doing is the user is still logging in with their least privileged account, and then when they need to enact a privileged action, they're actually triggering a small execution command, right? And then they would say what we call PB run. They would type PB run, and then they attempt. So instead of doing like a sudo or something like that to call that admin privilege, they're going to do PB run, and then we have the policies, we have the understanding of what they can and can't do, and that's how we're controlling what they can do from an execution perspective. And it's not just an execution of an app. We can go all the way down granularly to what can be done through, one example I can give you is, let's say I'm trying to run a script. Let's say the script is trying to maybe update some of the source packages, maybe it's trying to rewrite some files, and let's say it tries to do a reboot. Well, we could say that, Johnny is logged in, he's running PB run, he's running the script, and Johnny's profile says, you can't reboot this box. Well, he tries to run that script, we're going to be able to do everything in that script that Johnny's allowed to do, but then when we try to reboot, we're going to block that action. So it can also be very granular. It's not just a yes or no on the entire action. We can still filter out what can be done and what can't be. So again, we're logging in with least privilege, and then PB run is then using that endpoint privilege to understand what it can and can't do for the user. And then from a admin rights for network scanners like Nexus, need authenticated access, that would probably not so much be EPM. That would be the tie-in to our password management solution, and using the APIs to then allow systems, network scanners, things that need privilege to go run that executed scan. They need those elevated rights. but we don't necessarily want to hard code an account directly in the product because, again, now we've got this privileged account out there. So instead, we're using the product's capability to call an API to retrieve a credential, run as it needs to, and when it's done, we're able to then check that account back in, possibly rotate that account, maybe it's a domain service account, whatever it might be. So that way you have an audit around the usage of that account, and we can also make sure that if there was any kind of malicious behavior, that account got snooped or looked at, we're able to go rotate that once that task or that system is done using it.
And perfect. And then last question real quick, since we hit in the time window. So is there the ability to do an override feature where a user can get a temp code to allow an app execution?
Absolutely. So I think I went through it really fast. So as part of those user experiences, right, there may be a time where I need to do this now. And so I could possibly contact the service desk or maybe a privileged, someone that has access to the code generation portion of the product. They can then issue that user code, and we can do things like it's a one-time code. Maybe it's a 24-hour code. Maybe it's just while the user's logged in code. Maybe it's a forever code. But it only applies to that action or that task. So it's not like, oh, Johnny generated me a forever code. I'm going to plug this in every time I get prompted. No, sorry, Johnny. It's only going to work for that actual execution, that app that we were trying to do. So yes, absolutely, because we know that you can't always wait for a ticket or wait for somebody to respond. So all of those are workflows built in. There's even some API functionality as well, where we can actually call automated things. I have one customer that actually calls their DLP system and their security system, and then they also call AV totals online. So if an application they're trying to run isn't part of their policy, they're able to use an external source to automatically go ahead and grant that user access or not based on their profile.
Perfect. Well, look, Trevor, there's a lot of content. You covered a lot of ground there, so I know it's a lot for everyone to soak in, but great job. Thank you for attending today and, helping everyone to understand, where those protection points are and how the BeyondTrust solution can obviously help protect in multiple ways for all of our customers. So with that, we've got our next drawing.